Curselock LitRPG Curse Magic Adventure. By Left Right. Chapter 45, Whispers in the Dark. Well. Jude's voice rang as soon as Leland's consciousness fell back into his mortal body. He didn't answer right away and instead removed his grimoire and flipped to the newest contract page. Again the weight of the book surprised Leland, as did how it seemingly read his mind and switched gravity off for itself. He and Jude shared a look, but there were more pressing issues to solve. Cursed contract of the Lord of the Moonless. Use, for the duration of the contract, all works of art shine with the light of the moon. Usable once per hour. Return, when you come into contact with any moonless legacy that have been corrupted by the sightless king, slay them. Leland's frown transferred to Jude as he read through the page. Being forced to kill someone to keep a contract from expiring seemed a little over the top, especially since Leland only intended to kill the woman in white. Though he did agree that the cultists had to die, having a contract over the deaths of individuals made him feel like an assassin. Then there was the contract's actual use. Leland sighed, pressing his palm into the page. A violet halo grew from subtle wisps of air, all rushing around his body in a whirlwind. They culminated above his head, rounding into a ring of misty power. Blazing with power, Leland's eyes abruptly shut tight. Ugh, what kind of fool did that moon take me for? What? Jude tried. Slowly Leland creaked his eyes open, allowing his sight to adjust to the glowing rectangle hanging on their room's wall. The brilliant light radiated from a hung painting, one that he felt was incredibly tacky moments before. But now? Now that his eyes saw the poorly drawn bowl of fruit as something more, he re-evaluated. The sloppy curves and poor gradient were nothing more than an aspiring artist's progress. It was beautiful in its own right, something Leland couldn't say about any of his younger works. Finger painting or drawing in the mud with a stick was all he had done, nothing worthy of being hung in a cozy inn in a no-named village. It was inspirational. It was powerful. The painting was. Harbinger halo ended and Leland abruptly felt the painting was bad again. Although he did have some respect for the artist, he guessed. You know, runes, glyphs, and sigils are often considered art. I think it will allow me to see sigils, Leland said to Jude. We'll have to test it on some basic runes in an hour though. Jude's eyes actually lit up. That's going to be very helpful. Old Mooney seemed to want to kill his legacies as much as we did. He was a bit pushy though. Would you say he was waxing you around? Hey? Leland asked. Waxing, like the phase of the moon. You know what? Never mind. Leland snorted, pulling a blanket over himself, and soon he fell asleep. Jude did the same after muttering about waning something or other. Glennie watched the tree line through a small gap in his fingers. The white snow of the mountain reflected the bright light of the moon a little too much, blinding him despite being the dead of night. He had come to learn that the monsters in the area only came at night, which wouldn't have been a problem since he was supposed to be allowed back into the cabin at night. Apparently his progress adapting wasn't good enough, and after the second day on the mountain, he returned to a smoldering pile of ash and wood. At the time, Glennie yelled and thrashed about, even sitting down and stating very loudly that he gave up. It wasn't until he was surrounded by magma salamanders that he got the huntress message. There was no giving up, only survival, only the will to adapt. He escaped the battle rather easily, simply turning invisible and running away, at least until an arrow landed before his feet, blocking his exit. Again, Glennie understood his tormentor's message. With a bubbling growl, he lunged into the fray, killing the entire pack of scorching hot monsters in a mere few minutes. But, as if the universe understood his triumph and wished only for anarchy, something far more monstrous appeared not long after. It trembled the trees as it neared, knocking the fluffy snow loose from pine needles and forcing many mundane animals to flee. Glennie, meanwhile, was busy cutting out the hearts of the magma salamanders and couldn't run. Not if he didn't want to freeze the moment he stopped to rest for the night. The monster in question broke the tree line not much later, its hulking leathery scales uprooting everything it walked through. Glennie recognized the creature right away, its spiked back and serrated maw too characteristic to miss. A basilisk, he knew, pulling his gaze back to his trophy. With a final slice, Glennie stashed the heart in his makeshift bag and ran. He knew his limits, and so did the huntress. No arrows blocked his path. He ran for hours, well out of the basilisk's territory, and eventually found a tree to sleep in. Bundling himself up in his parasitic cloak and with the magma salamander heart held against his chest, he fell asleep. He woke the next morning to an uncomfortable heat, the heart doing its job and then some. Glennie took the morning slowly, mainly continuing to test the limitations of his cloak. It was a strange item, one he couldn't quite figure out. He felt powerful when he wore it, like he had infinite energy despite obviously not. The effects were more pronounced at night, he noted, something that confused him even more. As the hours ticked by, Glennie found himself catching odd streaks of color in his periphery. Red mixed with blues and blacks, tricked his mind, along with muted whispering. He froze each time, his heart bursting with fear. Something was inside him, something he desperately wanted to ignore. But he couldn't, not when he was out in the wilds for this. Experimenting with the cloak was abruptly put on hold as the ground trembled again. Glennie didn't wait, he simply ran. And ran. And ran. By the time night fell, he didn't think he stopped his jog once out of necessity for rest. He stopped to eat some burnt meat and to gather his bearings, but never because he felt exhausted. In fact, he wasn't even tired. Still, his mind needed rest despite his body not needing it. He sat there, alone in the snow and blinded by the moonlight, awake. He was in hell, he decided. A sleepless cold hell. A sleepless cold hell overseen by a sadistic kidnapper. A sleepless cold hell overseen by a sadistic kidnapper that was also devoid of his friends. Glennie's inner musing abruptly stopped, unlike the trees and ground. They trembled again, but this time an arrow blocked his path. Ah, I guess Isabel decided it was time for me to die, Glennie laughed to himself, slowly sliding his daggers out of their hilts and turning invisible. There was plenty of documentation available about basilisks, some of which Glennie had read. They were, after all, considered to be a major trophy for prominent solo combatants wishing to show a feat of strength, something his father had done as a young man only a few years older than his son was currently. Glennie remembered the stories his mother told to embarrass his father. He had to whittle it down for 3 weeks. He killed all of its food, starving the poor thing to death. She would purposefully leave out the actual battle with the beast, the struggle it was to finally slay, because it would rile him up. Glennie remembered teaming up with his mom and teasing his father, never letting him get a word in about the tale. But he also remembered asking his dad about the battle while they were fishing together alone. A basilisk's weak point is along its belly. Hard part is getting to it, near impossible unless you have some way to flip it. See, you want to disable it somehow. All big beasts have a critical flaw, they are slow while we are not. Stepping forward, Glennie pounced. The huntress carefully watched Glennie stalk the basilisk, more specifically the light that dulled in his eyes. Frankly, she wasn't sure if her plan would work. Getting a basilisk to move outside of its territory was a difficult job. So, she was going to get her time's worth out of the situation even if no fruit grew. Still, she had faith in the young one for some reason. She couldn't quite put it into words, but as she watched Glennie stab both daggers into the thick hide of the beast, she knew she was right. Like always. The attack did next to nothing in terms of damage, but it was a starting place. Most people Glennie's age, at least the ones she had dealt with over her time as an inquisitor, were cowards. The huntress knew some like Glennie existed, although they were often dead not long after their dream ceremonies. It took a special type of crazy to face down a basilisk, especially one in the freezing wilderness of the northern mountains. But that was what made Glennie special. A problem was given to him, and he was going to solve it. He probably figured he had a lifeline watching him from the trees, and while true, the huntress was not going to intervene. He could do it, she had faith. He would have to tap into what made the legacy of the chameleon special, however. He would have to abuse the power left over from the sightless king. Chapter 46, Chameleon. With all of his strength, Glennie stabbed down with both daggers. The blades dug slightly into the basilisk's hide, locking in place. He leveraged himself over his target, pushing his entire weight into the top of his weapons. Something snapped under the force, causing him to stumble away from the monster. He fell into the snow, only just gaining his balance in time to dodge a tail whip. He rolled, creating as much distance as he could. The basilisk flailed, a small amount of blood leaking out of its hind leg. It spun, searching for the little mosquito that dared to harm its impenetrable body. It barreled through trees and mountains of snow, all the while shaking the landscape like an active fault line. It sniffed the air, turning in Glennie's direction. The young man quickly closed his eyes, not wishing to be turned to stone. He sprinted through his mind's eye, dodging trees by memory alone. He circled around in a wide arc, easily outspeeding the monster's slow waddle. It was then he saw his weapons. Both blades were jutting from the basilisk's leg, one of which was snapped at the hilt. Glennie cursed internally, activating his legacy's most famous ability. His tongue launched forward and like a lasso, connected with his dagger and returning the weapon to his hand. Single knife combat was not his favorite, in fact it was something he rarely trained in. Glennie cursed again, this time for his laziness. Dagger in hand, he rushed forward just like he had been doing for the past 2 hours. Using the extra momentum, he stabbed hard into the beast's leg. Again, however, the wound he created was only superficial. Eyeing the basilisk's tail, Glennie tried to remove his dagger. It was stuck, sandwiched in between a cut of its own design. Dread fell over the young man as he pulled to no avail, eventually having to dodge away. 2 hours of durability, he whispered to himself. But then he really started to think about his statement. He had been running around the basilisk for 2 hours. In the snow. In the cold. It was the parasitic cloak he knew. It fueled him, kept him keen and energized. Too bad it wasn't enough. I can gift you the power. The world washed over in red as both of Glennie's eyes sparkled with illegitimate whispers. The sightless king, he knew, the power left over from the sigil. He saw strands of movement around him, each glowing red with corrupted power. The power the huntress told him he adapted to. Shut up, Glennie seethed through gritted teeth. This wasn't the first time the power trapped within his body offered prizes and gifts. Back in House Onryo the whispers were around. They spoke in low dull chants, like those of a divine hymn, but with a hint of true promise. Simply let the sightless king take over. The sound of multiple trees snapping broke Glennie from his internal struggle. Not fast enough to dodge, however. A spiked tail sheared above the snow, rocketing into Glennie's guarded form. His arms absorbed the attack but not before shattering from the force. He bounded and skidded along the snow, eventually coming to rest just before the basilisk's maw. It didn't so much as look at him, and only opened its mouth to swallow everything in front of it. Pain ruptured through Glennie's broken body as he forced himself to run. But his focus was less on the monster behind him and more on the monster inside him. It cackled with a horrible harmony, each note reaching beyond Glennie's fragile mind and instead toying with his primal fear. You are going to die. Let me in, I'll take care of the problem. The basilisk will never stop, not until you are dead at least. The sightless king pushed the power into his mind space. Glennie suddenly was face to face with his tormentor, the very being he promised Leland and Jude to fight. It was warm, like a fireplace in the dead of winter. It was smart, like a sage or scholar. It was idealistic, like a newly crowned king. It was, hungry, like a starving wolf on the prowl. Glennie screamed, his vision turning blind. No, he screeched, flailing about, punching the visions that plagued his mind. Adapt, he bellowed. Adapt how? His leg abruptly skipped, sending the rogue to the ground like a broken doll. His vision went red as his leg failed to react to his will. He lost control, his knee bending and kicking out like a spring. The feel slipped over his body, feeling for weak cracks in his mental defenses. As he slowly lost control over his broken arm, Glennie forced himself to think, not panic. In his mind, his parents' training pushed into the red of the sightless king. It was his power now, right? It was his legacy that collected his pain from the sigil. It was the stress from removing the sigil that moved the timeline. He was young, too young. Not in tune, not with himself nor his lord. Confidence fell through his pain and was washed away by the whispers. Suddenly a hand found his shoulder, it gripped him firmly, ushering him away from the bleak darkness. His vision returned to a world of red, blood or vile energy, he wasn't sure. It was fleeting, however, each time his heart beat, color returned to the snowy mountain. Adapt and overcome, a distinctly feminine voice said. One that teetered on the edge of his memory. Don't think, just do. Mom. Glennie spun at the words, only finding a basilisk guzzling up dirt and snow. The monster sniffed the air on occasion, rotating itself around to get a better scent. It eventually turned to face its prey, but Glennie had long since moved. He saw it, the silver glint of his dagger stuck deep within the monster's leg. He wanted it, he wanted to feel at least some bit of power, the power only a weapon could provide. False confidence or not, Glennie wanted to hold something he was familiar with. Something to ground himself back to reality. His first knife, Glennie remembered, was stolen from his parents' collection. He took it one night while they were both asleep. He snuck into their small armory, taking one that fit his hand nicely. He remembered feeling smug about it, that he had stolen from two powerful rogues. At least, until his mother burst his bubble by stealing it back the next day. Still, Glennie had felt strong holding the knife. He felt like he was equal with his parents despite his age not even reaching double digits. All it took was a weapon, one single blade to feel grander than he had ever felt before. The dagger stuck in the basilisk came out easy, along with it the power he desperately wanted to conquer. The red in his mind turned dim, the hold the sigil had over him finally snapping. The sightless king just sat there, whispering, never acting. It urged him to surrender control with promises of fame and grandeur. But it didn't force him. It couldn't. It was nothing more than a trick, one Glennie finally spotted for what it was. It was only an echo, a part of a much stronger power snatched away from a burning sigil. It was part of him, part of his legacy. It was no longer the Sightless King's, although it held some of his instincts. Glennie crushed the Sightless King's last will, removing the foreign claim over his adapted power. Red poured from his skin, bubbling around his body like a suit of armor. It contrasted perfectly against the snow, highlighting Glennie like a ruby within a marble faucet. The power moved his arms for him, accepting his will as absolute. He fought through the pain of broken arms, stabbing again and again until his dagger gorged the basilisk's leg. At some point his dagger had broken away, leaving nothing more than a serrated piece of metal attached to a hilt. It didn't matter, Glennie found, the red power flowing around him understanding his woes. The bubbles moved to his hand, stretching and elongating, eventually forming a deadly tip. The ethereal spike glowed with demonic power, digging deep into the monster like hot iron into the very snow on which he stood. The basilisk roared in pain, sending its tail to ward off any more attacks. Glennie didn't mind, however, and simply moved on to the next leg. The huntress smiled with manic eyes. She was right, again. She loved being right. She laughed, finding the sound oddly disturbing despite her sheer joy. Her emotions quickly died down after that. It was a shame Glennie had to go through this all now, she thought. His young age would surely be an avenue for turmoil in the future, especially around stolen renown. No one would believe he single-handedly killed a basilisk, which would most definitely cause a few bar fights down the line. Still, it was a good problem to have, especially considering the alternative. The huntress almost moved to intervene when Glennie failed to dodge a tail whip. With the pain from 2 broken arms and the mental struggle of fighting for dominance, she felt a break in action would have done the young man well. But he fixed it himself. She would have to ask him how later, but for now she was content with watching Glennie finish off the beast. It wouldn't be but a few more days until they left the mountains. Glennie needed time to figure out his new power and the cloak that kept him going all this time. The cloak, in the grand scheme of things, might be more important than the Sightless King's touch. It would be a close comparison, but the huntress had her money on the cloak. Parasitic items simply never stopped growing, at least as long as the wearer progressed. She watched Glennie stab his conjured dagger into the defenseless mess of a basilisk, then again, and again. And again. Chapter 47, Maps. There were no guards defending Shoutwell's walls. No men to lower or raise the gate. No personnel waiting in line to enter. There was only the outer limits of isolated fog, only the feeling that something was not right, that something was waiting within the city. Leland stepped past Jude and Bor, activating his Harbinger Halo-cursed contract with the Lord of the Moonless. Nothing caught his eye as art right away, so the team progressed into the city. Bor made quick work of the city gate, his rapier silently cutting through the rusty steel bars. He then took the initiative, stepping through and peering through the fog deeper into the streets. It only took a second, but every second was important. Unless they wished to take hours to cross a few streets. They ran, all the while Leland kept his eyes open and wide. He scanned alleyways and prominent walls, only finding moonlight glowing art from within a few buildings. Clear, he whispered, pushing Jude and Bor into a damp alley. A moment later the contract ended and the violet halo above his head faltered. Leland caught a strange look from Bor, one he couldn't quite place but chose to ignore. Frankly, both boys were annoyed with the butler for how he had been treating Leland. Looks of disgust, irritation, even defensive curiosity. They both knew it stemmed from something neither of them were really conscious of, but the wound had all but healed. By now they figured Bor would be acting like his usual self. Looking away from Leland, Bor shifted his bad arm closer to his chest. Jude scoffed. "Get over it, dude." "I beg your pardon," Bor replied curtly. "It's okay, Jude. Don't let it worry you. Let's just get this done," Leland quickly said, putting himself between the pair. Bor raised an eyebrow to the berserker legacy, his hand posturing for a quick draw. But, once he found Leland staring back at him, he quickly released his posture. "We have an hour," Leland continued. "During which, we are not going to fight." The butler held up his hands. "I have no idea what you are talking about." With a laugh, Jude said, "We both have noticed you stealing glances at Leels. You lost, get over it. Now is not the time to be hesitant around him." Bor chewed his lip and said nothing. He sat on a wooden crate, turning away from the 2 young men. Leland took Jude a few steps away. "Thanks, but we can't afford to piss him off. Glennie needs us, remember." "I do, it's just. I've seen that look too many times. People would look at my mom like that. They were afraid she was going to lose control and go on a rampage. You never told me that. Jude shrugged. Wasn't that big of a deal. My dad would always say things to challenge whoever was being weird. Oftentimes it ended in a waiter or royal concierge leaving in embarrassment. But now? Seeing Bor do it. I can feel the rage building. Leland smiled, patting his friend on the shoulder. Don't worry about it. Bor can act like whatever he wants around me. Once we get Glenny and get paid, as far as I'm concerned, we are done with House Onryo. Jude nodded with the sentiment. So, what do you want to do for an hour? Shrugging, Leland said, not sure. I was thinking of trying to learn some cantrips but I have no idea where to start. Jude took a deep breath. Guess we are just going to sit here in silence then. I've got nothing. Wish I had a harmonica right about now. The next hour was an oddly stressful time for Leland. It was Jude, he knew. From the way the berserker lord sat, from the way he chewed his nails and bounced his leg, the situation was getting to him. Glenny was in danger, lost in a different world as far as they were concerned, and they had to wait for an hour. As Leland's internal clock moved the hour hand the final 12th of a revolution, Jude was reeling to go. So, they did, purple halo and all. They went faster, dipping through the dark fog-covered streets like hungry ants rushing to get food for their queen. It wasn't until they arrived at the market square that Leland stopped the group. There were still no signs of moonlight glowing sigils, but something else caught his attention. Words. They dropped everything, racing around the broken and abandoned stalls and finding refuge in the shadows of a small hut. As Leland zeroed in on the sound, it was a gentle glow that alerted him to exactly where the talking was coming from. A sigil, carved into the very ground the speakers stood upon, glowed with powerful white light. It cut through the dense fog, like a lighthouse, signaling him to the danger. 4 cultists, clad in identical red robes and obscuring hoods. Blood leaked from the shadows within their headwear, dyeing the upper chest of their robes wet red. I think, Leland said to the others. They are recruiting? I'm not sure, I can't hear them fully. Bor tilted his ear towards the invaders. They are calling any and all who wish to feel the power of the sightless king. Lord does not matter. Profession does not matter. Identity does not matter. Sounds like a fun group, Jude muttered. No individualism within their cult. Who'd go for that? The group shrugged and quickly discovered the monotony of staring at the inside of a wooden stall. As the hour slowly whittled down, movement caught all of their attention. From the opposite side of the market, a middle-aged man rushed through the fog. He simply walked up to the cults, listening to their deadly tenets along the way. Upon falling to his knees before them, he yelled, "Please! I can't take it anymore. If what you say is true, what must I do?" A shorter cultist stepped off their stage, reaching for the prospect with a gentle hand. She took the man by the chin, pulling him up to meet her eyes. Red glowed from under her cowl. "I see," he boomed. "I understand. Amazing. Absolutely amazing." The cultist sent him away a moment later, back into the fog, back into the land of the blind. "What was that?" Jude asked. Bor answered. "We just saw the birth of a cultist. That simple? No questionnaire, no interview. Not when the sightless king has the power to influence thought." 43 minutes, Leland said. When the moonless contract became available again, the group made it to the sewer's entrance and were greeted with 2 glowing sigils plastered on opposite walls leading in. "They're in there," Leland quickly said, causing Bor to unleash his sword. A thick groove cut through the stonework, severing the art and rendering them useless. A moment later, the group's boots were covered in vile sludge. "Ugh," Jude moaned. "Why'd it have to be the sewers? Why not a nice pub at the end of a quiet street?" "Now is not the time for jokes," Bor quickly said. "Pay attention. We don't have the luxury of waiting around an hour." "Right," Leland said. "We keep moving. Eyes down and looking for sigil markings." They moved slowly, very slowly. They followed the slight stream of the sewage, following it back towards the source. The fog worsened as they walked to the point that Leland could barely read the words written in his grimoire. "You know," he said. "When the fog first appeared, it spilled out from the sewers." Jude was way ahead of him. "If we keep following this way, I'll bet we find the fog creator." "We are looking for Glenny," Bor said in a hushed yell. "Nothing more." Leland and Jude shared a look, although the fog made it difficult. In the end, both boys agreed and quickly fell back into tense silence. At some point, they came to an intersection and decided to wait for the contract to restart. When the purple halo blazed back to life above Leland's head, he gasped. "Everywhere. All around us. Close your eyes." Bor set his back to a wall and postured his weapon forward. What? What's wrong? The entire tunnel is glowing. We are standing within a giant sigil. What do we do? Jude asked. We need to check each other. Jude, come here. Leland grabbed his friend and set him just in front of himself. On 3, we both open our eyes and look for red speckles within our irises. Oh, okay. Alright, ready? 1, 2, 3. Their eyes snapped open, Leland's instantly shrinking with the bright glow encasing the group. He squinted, finding Jude's eyes as a cautionary solace. And, close. Leland swallowed. You checked out. Did you see anything? Jude responded with a head shake no one could see. Only purple flames. Good, that's good. Alright Bor, you're next. A heavy breath left the butler's mouth. Once in position, he counted it down. 1, 2, 3. Again Leland squinted, the light blinding him. A moment later they both closed their eyes. Anything? Jude asked. No, Leland said. Must be the fog, Bor said. The sigils are covered. I guess we can't destroy the source of the fog even if we find it, Jude said. We need to stick to the denser tunnels, Leland added. If one of us looks into a sigil, everything is over. They will know we are here. How are we supposed to locate Glennie then? Bor asked. If we are sticking to the fog, then how are we supposed to make use of moon sight? Your ability is useless if you can't see. Leland grimaced. It was always a stretch. But how could we have guessed they'd just covered the entire sewer in sigils? Bor wrapped his knuckles along his sword hilt. Maybe it can still be useful. We just got to think about mapping the cultists' territory inversely. Leland's eyes widened. We go where there are no sigils. Map the safe places for us, thus finding the fortified areas by process of elimination. Jude frowned. That is going to take a long time. Smiling, Leland said, who knows? The spell is still low ranked. Maybe it will rank a few times. Chapter 48, Adaptation. Conjuration, who'd have thought? Glennie spun at the words, bubbly red power reacting to his will and forming a pair of spikes. He shoved the impromptu weapon forward, finding it abruptly stopped inches from the huntress' throat. Angry little one, aren't we? She asked. But I can see you are coming into that power all on your own. A few more days and I might let you leave the mountain. It was mid-morning in the cold snow forest of the North Mountains, the sun was high above and not a cloud was left in the sky. Under normal conditions, Glennie would have called it a perfect morning. But, since he was out in the wilderness under duress, he couldn't find the beauty in it. Days? He repeated. No. I've played your game long enough, take me back. Isabel raised an eyebrow. Confident are we? Only took you beating an inner demon. You said I had to adapt. Well, here I am, adapted. I killed the basilisk days ago. It's time to go back. So, if you don't mind, my friends are waiting. Glennie strolled off, his star-peppered ebony cloak flapping with the cold wind. A sigh escaped Isabel's lips. There's a faster way down the mountain than walking. Not to mention you'd have to charter a boat and find your way across 2 continents to get back to Shoutwell. Glennie froze. What did you just say? I'm saying that you are half a world away from your friends. And, I have a teleporting artifact. We can be back in Shoutwell within minutes. So, you better humor me unless you want to walk all the way back. Fine, he ceded. What do you want me to do? Oh, nothing much, she said, oozing sarcasm. Just test your limits, battle me. Glennie blinked a few times then thrust his red spikes at the huntress' throat. She easily backstepped, parrying his dominant wrist with her own before smacking him in the chest with an open palm. Rather weak, I'd say. Not much style in your movements. Only stab, stab, stab. That's not going to get you very far. Glennie grumbled something, taking a step back and setting his feet. His posture lowered along with his center of gravity. Suddenly he shot off, turning into a whirlwind of deadly red power. His hands moved regardless of his conjured weapons, each taking new positions in his fighting style. The effect was a hail of blades and fists, each attacking independent of one another. The huntress smiled at the attempt, but ultimately dodged or blocked all of his attacks. Interesting idea, she said. A few years of practicing that and you might have something worthy of pursuing. As it is now? Not so much. Nothing is deadly enough, your concentration is too split. I've just got to adapt, right? Glennie said with a glare. Isabel frowned. Did you learn nothing? You didn't really teach anything. Just threw me on a mountain and expected me to progress. She thought for a second. Maybe you're right. You succeeded in the instinctual portion of your legacy, I suppose I might as well help you with the practical. Let's start with what your parents taught you. Nothing special, no extra appendages of power, just daggers. Glennie shrugged and stubbornly controlled the power of the sightless king into his hands. The bubbles boiled over his back and chest, finding his grip and morphing into a mess of red. Hey, the huntress asked. What is that? I am not sure. It doesn't want to move to my will. It feels like it's only doing so because it doesn't have a choice, not because it listens to me. Interesting, was all she said before taking out a pair of small knives from her boots. She tossed them over. Just use those for the moment. Glennie begrudgingly picked up the weapons, shifting them into his hands with practiced ease while the red bubbles dissipated. He fell into the stance of moments ago, suddenly thrusting forward into an offensive push. The knives were much smaller than he was used to, so he focused on his footwork more than anything. Each step, each shuffle, each hasted pivot, Glennie fell into a rhythm battling against the huntress. As the minutes ticked by, he found openings and clear points of attack. He felt sure his opponent was toying with him, but he pressed the advantage anyway. Attack with one hand and the opposite foot, backstep, and switch focus. Jump around her blind spot, while feigning a low kick. Block the counter-attack, and counter back. Suddenly an open palm cracked against his nose, causing the snowy floor to be dyed red. Glennie glared at her despite the small red vial she passed him. Impressive stamina. You didn't slow down until the 40-minute mark. But we have the cloak to thank for that. 40 minutes. Glennie said, finding himself breathing heavy. When did that happen? The huntress didn't respond, only pointed up. The sun was high overhead, a stark contrast to the morning air from when they started sparring. Still, that fighting style is weak. I'm surprised your parents taught you like that. I figured your mother especially would have been more keen on you learning something worthwhile. The forest went silent. What did you say? She shrugged. Dueling you was eye-opening. Think about it. Your mother was a renowned royal inquisitor and she was killed by some half-baked murderer. The only explanation is that her fighting style was weak, don't you? A red spike appeared in Glennie's hand and launched forward. The huntress' eyes widened from the sudden attack, but she easily caught the conjured weapon with an empty hand. Like I was saying, she continued. I think it is best you learn something else. A bubble formed and drilled from Glennie's other hand. She casually moved to intercept it, lazily throwing up her free hand. Suddenly the spike extended, rushing past her slow defenses and catching her in the breastplate. The attack didn't so much as scratch her, but it did open her defenses enough for Glennie to capitalize. The bubbles reacted to his command and formed gently along the twin knives he carried. Red power stuck to metal, elongating the blades into small sabers. Throwing caution to the wind, Glennie pounced. He threw all of his strength and speed into his attacks, acting more like a berserker than a rogue. The huntress acted in kind, summoning forth a single arrow she wielded like a great sword. How dare you! Glennie yelped between attacks. She was not weak. The huntress crossed his thigh with two quick swipes, shredding clothes and shearing into his skin. Glennie roared, ignoring the injury and pressing his sabers harder. Another line of blood was formed along his left wrist and a third on his right forearm. Pain shot through his knuckles as each were quickly butchered as well. Glennie went low, sweeping his leg. The huntress easily vaulted over him, landing another quick cut along the back of his neck. He turned, finding an arrow tip between his eyes. I think this is a good stopping point, don't you? She said, catching a wild swing from her right. She punched him in the throat, sending him to the snow. Look kid, look at yourself. I've killed you several times over. You lost and you cannot win. Glennie didn't care and forced more red bubbles to his side. Isabelle sighed and activated a legacy ability. Suddenly there was a flash of light and she disappeared. Interesting parasitic item you've got here, she said from behind, casually slipping the cloak on. Shame it binds to one's soul. I might have stolen it from you once we found it wasn't cursed. Sneering, Glennie suddenly felt his energy bottom out. Oh? Poor little boy finally ran out of juice, she laughed. Like I said, I think this is a good stopping point. Take it back, he yelled. You called my mother weak. She was a comrade of yours. How can you say that about? The huntress raised a hand, silencing him. Can you not see I said that to rile you up? The sightless king power obviously works from emotions, and obviously I lied. No one would be able to reach Royal Inquisitor status if they weren't powerful. Glennie stared at her, his poster deflating somewhat. You said. Read my lips, Isabel said slowly. I lied. To rile you up. Well, not about leaving her fighting style. It's only going to get you so far, especially with conjuration in your armory. I have to change. Because you are too tall. I've met your mother several times and you definitely have your dad's height. And I imagine you are still growing. She pointed to the 2 knives sitting in the snow. Just look at what you did to attack me with the sightless king power. You extended the knives. Your body knows you need longer weapons, just your head doesn't. But Glennie tried. You can stick with daggers if that is what you are wondering. Just longer ones. Those sabers you created were good. Maybe a bit shorter would be more optimal, actually. I don't. The huntress rolled her eyes. Kid, shut up. You're supposed to be the quiet one. Just sit there and let me think. When we leave this mountain, you will have a full training regimen to go off of. Glennie snapped his mouth closed and fell back. Chapter 49, Gamble. Leland, Jude, and Boar stared at a crude mapping of the sewer system of Shoutwell. Tunnels crossed over each other and ran the length of streets, some stopped abruptly while others drifted out to sea. Various numbers had been written on each of the tunnels, marking their passage in terms of sigils blocking the way. The group discussed over a late dinner, having spent the entire day slowly wading through filth and sludge. Hour upon hour had devolved into simple minutes of actual work. Leland's Harbinger Halo was the primary driving force for each of their irritation. But there was hope. The spell in question had ranked up twice through the frequent usage. Harbinger Halo has increased to rank 6. Contract lasts for 360 seconds. The additional time had saved the group literal hours, allowing them to finish mapping the outer tunnels by nightfall. Looks like they are in the center of the city, Jude said, snapping a chunk of jerky off with his teeth. Is that under the rich people quarter? Boar stifled a sigh. Yes, the rich people quarter, as you say. Does that have any significance? Boar shrugged, but Leland had an idea. Cleaner sewers. Less, he lifted a boot up, casting down a rain of vileness. Of whatever this is. Everyone poops, Leels. Leland blinked a few times. Yeah, right. Wow, you are incredibly smart. You should write a book. A beat passed. No, because the rich people can afford better plumbing. Better infrastructure leads to the rich people not having to call in commoner plumbers. Jude looked skeptical. Is that true? They both looked to Boar, who this time did sigh. House Onryo has not called for a plumber in a decade, yes. I suspect the theory is correct, but it also gives the cult a strategic point to operate out of. Take out the nobles, no one will be left in the city to fight back. Agreeing to the point, Jude added, until the commoners rise. Just look at the bricklayer uprising a century ago. They nearly killed the queen. Leland and Boar looked at him. What? He asked. I like to read, sometimes, when it's about mass killings and stuff, like that. Clearing his throat, Leland moved on. So, now that we have this map, which area is more likely to hold Glennie? Boar took a deep breath. The cult is probably only the woman in white and maybe 2 or 3 trusted individuals. The rest of the red robes are nothing more than fodder to slow us down. With that said, I suspect the leadership is in a room much smaller than we'd initially expected. Leland nodded along. Since their only requirements for joining is to look into a red light and want power, yet. I doubt those people are allowed near the sightless king's body parts. Looming over the map, Jude waved his finger at the lines and numbers. So, maybe here, here, and here, as the suspected places the woman in white could be. Boar hummed. Maybe here as well. He marked the locations. So potentially 4 places, Leland said. That's only 4 hours of checking. Maybe 3 if these 2 close locations are found to be dead ends quickly. Might I remind, the butler added, that the tunnels leading through these areas are going to be encased by sigils. The fog is our only cover and your spell is going to be useless for the most part. That's going to be a problem, yet, Leland said, sitting back and falling silent. Minutes ticked by as different ideas and plans were thought up and promptly pushed back down. Eventually everyone silently decided to table to conversation and finish eating. They had nearly an hour before Harbinger Halo was available for use again, surely they'd think of something by then, right? Leland wasn't so sure. His mind kept falling back to Glennie and what he was going through at the moment. Charging through a tunnel of sigils didn't seem like such a bad idea when he thought in terms of potentially helping his friend. But that was just it, potentially it could help Glennie. There was no evidence that he was even in the sewers. Or alive for that matter. Thinking like that would get him nowhere, Leland knew. So he focused on one of the few things that could tide his mind over, magic. Before he could start messing with raw mana and life force, movement on his hand pulled his attention. The small crow tattoo moved with fervent passion, moving its head up and down like a fan at a rock concert. Leland could only wonder what the Lord of Curses was trying to tell him. Moving a tattoo slightly wasn't much to go on. He didn't think the crow was trying to help him understand cantrips nor the secrets of magic. But it sure was distracting. How was he supposed to focus on magic with a crow nagging him? But Leland guessed the crow was right. This was not time for magic. A plan needed to be drawn up, edited, and forged. Just then Jude said something. What about blowing up the street and dropping into the sewers? Boar instantly replied. No, the streets are too thick. Shoutwell has a lot of moisture, sinkholes from erosion are rather common and a larger street foundation was the answer the city came up with. Oh. Did that work? Mostly. Nice. Something strange about that caught Leland's attention. What about the underbelly then? Shouldn't most of the city fall into the massive cavern below us? The former underground city leader answered. If you go by the stories, the founding pirates had a genius legacy of inscription in their crew. She put glyphs all over the underbelly's ceiling, reinforcing it from collapse. And if you don't believe the stories, between the underbelly's ceiling and the Shoutwell city streets, there is enough of a buffer that the moisture in the air doesn't erode anything important. How does that make sense? Jude asked. There are waves and water at the bottom of the underbelly. That's moisture right there. Boar shrugged. Then the ceiling is inscribed. Sounds far-fetched that a pirate crew had a lord of inscription, Leland said. Those are quite rare and often sought after. Boar shrugged again. Then there is a large enough buffer so that Shoutwell doesn't sink in. With an exasperated sigh, Leland asked, can we blow up the ceiling of the underbelly and climb into the sewers? Boar didn't answer right away and took a moment to look over the sewers map. Maybe, the issue would then be climbing up. Long ladders aren't exactly easy to come by. Then we'd just have to blow up the ceiling where we can easily climb in. Say on top of a building or rock pillar or something. Maybe. Locals wouldn't take too kindly. Smugglers and merchants alike. Jude laughed at that. Then we just have the ones who wish to fight us follow us into the sewers. They'll be a good distraction for the cultists. Jude may have a point, Boar said. He does. Leland asked. I do. Jude echoed. I was mainly saying that as a joke, but if you think the idea has merit then. No, I mean that whoever tries to stop us would have to follow us. And most will refuse to enter the sewers. Too close to the surface, too close to those who might put them in jail. Boar said. Take away their freedom, Leland concluded. Do you think some might help us if we ask? The cultists are going to take over the underbelly if they resurrect the sightless king. Unlikely. There have been invasions to the underbelly before. Historically, the kingpins have combined their forces and eliminated the threat. Whether the joint army could defeat the sightless king, I have no idea. But they will try. Jude thumped his thumbs together. What about preemptively getting the kingpins to join forces? Snapping his fingers, Leland said, yet. People seem to remember you down there, Boar. Maybe you could get, what were their names again? Big Boss and Simone? To attack the cultists in the sewers. No, Boar instantly answered. They will kill me then you too. No. Simply no. Leland considered that for a moment. Not if you bring them critical information about the cult. Like the 4 potential locations that the sightless king could be. No. Jude shared a glance with his friends. Honestly, forging a relationship with the criminal underground may even be good for the future of Shoutwell. House Onryo is in quite a bit of debt if I remember correctly. Boar's eyes blazed. Watch yourself, adventurer. House Onryo are not criminals. Leland held up his hands. What Jude is trying to say is that House Onryo has debts due to the Icewallows. And now that the Icewallows are dead, there is a vacancy. The old butler glared. You want House Onryo to take over the Lucky Blue production the Icewallows left behind? You want Lady Onryo to make the drug that killed her son? How ignorant. Boar, Leland interrupted. Remember that the Inquisitors will be here soon. They will sort everything out. All Lady Onryo has to do is agree to make Lucky Blue. Not actually do it. Boar scoffed. No. And if you remember correctly, Lady Onryo has already decided to wait for the Inquisitors to retake the city. She does not need the Kingpin's help. If you continue to push this horrid idea, then I will leave. Simple as that. My lady's name will not be tarnished by your delusions of grandeur. We are here for Glennie, not to eradicate the sightless cult. Remember that. Leland and Jude deflated at that. No, you're right. I apologize. Glennie comes first. We just got excited at the idea of an army. Yeah, sorry, Jude added. Taking a deep breath, Boar ended the conversation with, we will take the map and our knowledge to the kingpins. If they do not kill us on the spot and refuse to help, we will blow up the ceiling closer to one of the 4 spots. Leland and Jude's lips curved upward. Chapter 50, Kingpins. Returning to the underbelly was a rather easy feat. No one other than the odd cultist and fresh recruit walked the streets. Most, if not everyone sane, stayed in their homes under the cover of a candle-less room. Doors were locked, children were hushed, and an atmosphere of unease left the area in an abandoned state. As Boar led Jude and Leland to Shoutwell's Smugglers Guild, they found no obstacle. They entered the lower tunnels quickly, followed by the real passage to the underbelly. As soon as they stepped into the illegal cavern, their eyes quickly found reprieve. The lack of fog felt amazing to the group, each silently agreeing to take a moment and simply look. Making full use of their vision, they traced around the underworld, finding the vertically built cramped buildings, ancient reinforced bridges, and people. It was strange to Leland, seeing a mass of people out in the open. It felt like weeks since he last saw a crowd. But that was when he noticed white mist falling into the underbelly from the ceiling. It was faint and quickly dissipated into the airspace of the cavern, but the cause was more than apparent. The cult is going to make an attempt for this place soon, Leland said, pointing to the ceiling. Boar took a long breath. So they may, he said in a voice less than happy. Jude soon took to the stairs leading down, the others quickly following along. They eventually stepped into the city major, past those on the outer streets, those in need of serious help. There was more this time, more people smoking or selling Lucky Blue. Many simply sat around, their minds spinning with the thrills of manufactured mana. A shame, Leland whispered as if his words would matter if overheard. Boar didn't respond, yet adjusted his light armor in a near-obsessive way. Jude was much the same but kept his eyes forward as much as possible. Upon entering the market street, the group hung in the shadows, passing through quickly and quietly. Many mercenaries were out and about, bellowing about their triumphs or heroics. Some yelled in a language Leland was unfamiliar with, others with thick accents that spoke of far-off lands. As they passed, a fight suddenly broke out between 2 warrior types, each drawing blades in a swift yet forceful motion. They battled for a bit but quickly found other things to do when the underbelly and forces arrived. Even the onlookers found other things to be enamored by, walking off like the floor was on fire. Shaking his head at the display, Leland asked, why didn't the enforcers help when those witches attacked us? Boar gave a weak shrug. Probably paid off. Enforcers follow very loose rules. Keep the peace unless someone pays, sort of thing. Why have enforcers at all then? Wouldn't the Leland's words died in his throat and Boar quickly pulled him and Jude out of sight. What are they doing down here? Jude screeched through hushed lips. Invading already. Leland poked his head around the corner, finding 6 red-robed sightless cultists standing in the center of the large market area. They called for those looking for salvation, for any and everyone wanting power and respect. They're recruiting, he growled. A twinkle appeared in Boar's eye. A slow invasion. He laughed. That may work. Jude's lip twitched. What? You said an invasion into the underbelly would fail. A frontal assault, yes. But one with subtlety and numbers? Perhaps not. Leland continued the butler's thought. They don't need to kill all who oppose them, they are hoping that their promise of revenge and power is enough to have the newly initiated do it for them. Exactly, Boar said. Many people down here hate the kingpins. It's only a matter of time until some desperate souls decide to test out the sightless king's powers. All the more reason for the kingpins to listen and help us, Jude added. They took a wide berth around the cultists, making use of the crowd to hide their faces. More than a few times Boar suddenly turned his gaze onto people in the area, a silent threat being communicated to those who recognized him. It generally worked, most of the lowlifes didn't want anything to do with the old man. At least, until someone with a W brand appeared. Boar, Leland spoke up. I see her. She's just probing us. They remember what happened last time we were down here. Is there going to be a fight? Jude quickly asked. No, Boar answered. Not while we are walking in this direction. What's in this direction? Certain death. Oh, right. Lovely. The group fell back into silent steps and eventually exited the main market area. The street opened up as buildings fell away. In the distance a large wooden ship sat alone on a rocky pillar. It was stabbed through the hull, like a meal set on a roasting spit. Bor's eyes softened as he looked at it. Something wrong? Leland quickly asked. No, nothing. This way, come on. The butler turned, venturing further and further from the old ship. The crumbled stone floor changed the moment they stepped off a bridge. Properly paved concrete sat without scuffs or blemishes, mimicking the non-cracked foundation of the nearby buildings. The amount of people around suddenly decreased, placing the group formally without cover. Let me do the talking. Do not accept any deals without me being present. And do not be rude. Bor's eyes found Jude's. I'm not rude. No one responded. Entering the building, the group found itself in a long room. The underbelly throne room was a vast assortment of riches and treasures. The walls and floors sparkled with unimaginable glitter and sheen, gold and ivory making up the primary highlights. From the door to the far wall, the room exhibited only money, money, money. Wealth was on display like bricks on a house or leaves in a forest. Shuddering, Leland focused on the goal and not the demons of greed. He was tempted, the piles of raw gold in the corners more than enough to fuel his life for decades. Looking to Jude, he could tell they shared a similar thought. Neither had seen so much wealth, not even when royal attendants met with their parents. Gems, silks, and more than a few loops of opulent chains were worn by the room's bystanders, each with varying levels of annoyance on their faces. Some looked downright despicable, like they expected a public execution by the end of the day. Others were more sympathetic. They saw Jude and Leland for what they were, kids. Kids who would battle the heavens for their friend. Now what do we have here? A feminine voice cooed from across the room. Sitting with a curious gaze, a woman clad in velvet threads watched the trio enter. She subtly motioned, removing the nearest of her entourage from her throne and sending them to the neighboring area. Her face brightened as they neared, despite a large scar trailing across her right eye. An embroidered eye patch hid most of the wound, but part of her cheek was ruined from the laceration. Big boss, Bor said, throwing his hand before him in a bow. Jude and Leland quickly made the same motion. Bor, the kingpin responded, her tone still lackadaisical and curious. Last I saw you, you were running with your tail between your legs. Yes, those were quite trying times. She laughed. So they were, so they were. But you landed on your feet. House Onryo. Very posh. The Onryos have been very generous. Yet you returned to me? Very interesting. Bor tightened his smile. And Simon, yes. Big Boss's eyes quickly found the ceiling. They hung there as she took a deep breath. Once settled, she returned her gaze to Bor. Why? Because Shoutwell is in danger. The sightless cult, yes, we know of them. But they matter not to us. They are a surface issue. No, so much, no, Bor said. They are nearly to compel. Bor. The butler shuddered, turning slowly to a side hallway. A skinny older man stepped out of the shadows with both arms out, like a doctor entering a surgery. Thick green goop fell from between his fingers where an attendant was instantly there to clean the mess despite the horrid stink. Simon, Bor said. How wonderful to see you again. Is it? The man asked. Last time we saw each other, I had just finished killing your first mate. Remember? Remember the blood? I do, and my statement was sarcastic. Yes, it is horrible to see you again. I wished I would never have to step in this room again. But things are dire. It was then Leland noticed the branding of the witch on Simon's face. His posture instantly changed, as did Jude's. The woman also looked hesitant around the kingpin, like anything she did was under scrutiny and potential punishment. She was afraid, Leland realized. Simon, wiping his hands off with the poor woman's dress, noticed the air in the room change. Who are they? He asked Bor. The two who killed William Icewillow. A ripple of chatter echoed through the vaulted ceiling as the bystanders rose in rage. Some yelled curses, others quickly left trying to hide their faces. Even Jude and Leland were staring at their butler comrade. Simon laughed. Oh? I heard Old Wool had escaped the Inquisitors. Confirming his death is a relief off my shoulders. You know, he asked Big Boss. She ignored him. When was this? Bor looked to Leland. 3 weeks ago in Lion Trunk, specifically the dungeon just outside the city. The kingpins hummed. Bor's voice filled the void. They did you two a favor, and we wish to collect. A favor? Simon boomed. How so? You are now the sole provider for Lucky Blue on this side of the continent. And Big Boss smuggling operations have reaped the rewards of fresh territory. And what? You want us to run the sightless out of the upper city? Quite a big undertaking. The woman attendant froze. She hesitantly relooked over the guests in the throne room, a slight sparkle in her eyes. Not as much as you'd think, Bor answered. We have a map of the sewers with 4 potential spots for their operations as well as knowledge on their defenses. And you lack an army to act on this knowledge. Big Boss inferred. We were petitioning for an open bounty on the cultists. You know they have already infiltrated the guild, right? Jude suddenly said. Bor grimaced but quickly added to the question. They are recruiting a few streets over in the main market. The Sightless King uses some kind of mind control, meaning eventually you will be overrun from inside. Almost as if to punctuate his words, the woman who had been following Simon attacked, her eyes glowing fiery red. Chapter 51, Escape. Simon screeched as the woman toppled over him, shoving him to the ground and bashing his head into the marble floor. He hastily threw up his hands to guard, missing the first punch by mere seconds. Suddenly his face flooded with blood and the floor was speckled with red. He managed to block the next punch, but by then the woman had a thin silver sword jutting from her neck. Her lifeless body fell over when Bor ripped his rapier back to his side. Soon the pristine throne room was buzzing with intrigue and grotesque grunts. The small crowd had moved closer a few steps, watching the attempted murder with deafening stares. My point exactly, Bor said. Those with grudges are the ones most likely to accept the Sightless King. Which just so happens to be pretty much everyone in the guild, Big Boss finished before looking down to Simon. Oh, get up, fool. All she did was hit you. She broke my nose, the kingpin retorted. How did she break my nose? She's weaker than a child. That's what the Sightless King's power does. A small boost to strength and a significant one to confidence, Leland said. An attendant ran a handkerchief to Simon, who then patted his nose and upper lip. He glared at the room and dead body, scoffing in disgust. Leland and Jude internally scoffed back, repulsed by the witch's attitude towards attempted murder. Having to work with a branded witch cut into both of them, only the thought of finding Glennie easing their ever-churning stomachs. So, Bor stately impassively. You will invade the sewers. Big Boss took a careful moment to eye the red power draining from the woman's eyes like the blood that flowed from the hole in her neck. Yes, she eventually said. But only with that map of yours. What else can you tell us? Leland took the initiative. Sigils cover the walls of the sewers. The fog makes it possible that you can walk through, but I wouldn't leave it to chance. I suggest long spears to score the ground, ceiling, and walls as you go. Also be ready with chalk and restraints for people afflicted. Maybe a copy of Brix's Guide to Defending Magic if your magic users don't know the pattern by heart. Big Boss raised an eyebrow. Oh, is that all? You should also check your men you send to the sewers for the Sightless King beforehand, Leland continued. Just one agent could ruin everything for everyone. I take it you 3 are just messengers in this war, she said. Not fighters. Bor answered before Leland could. Our side is weakened. Our party used to be 9, but the Sigils have taken 1 and the others were wounded by the cult's leader. Aha! Simon suddenly shouted. A lie. I can spot these things from a mile away, Bor. You know that. Is this true? Big Boss asked, her single eye narrowing. Bor let out a long sigh. More like partially true, he said. The one who was affected by the sigils had been purged but still went missing. Simon's great smile sputtered. He speaks the truth. Big Boss then stood, stepping around the dead woman and to Bor. It was good to see you again, old friend. I miss our time. A scratching sound suddenly appeared from Simon. He dragged a thick needle across the marble floor, casting lines of blood in odd runic patterns. Before you go, Bor. I was recently robbed. Do you know anything about that? Bor hesitated. No, he lied, keeping his face as still as possible. The kingpin smirked, pressing his hand into the rune. Suddenly the walls turned thick with a blue gooey substance. Big Boss yelled something, but her anger was outshined by the screeching crowd. The guild's high-ranking members quickly ran out of the throne room, not before some fell victim to Simon's attack. The goo latched onto their clothing and legs, sticking them in place like a fly on glue. Those affected cursed at their Simon, some even saying not again. Not wanting to stick around, Bor pushed Leland and Jude out of the room as fast as possible. At some point the boys had drawn their weapons, but no fighters came to intervene. They simply exited like everyone else, eventually reaching the bridges leading out of the area. Showing the way, the butler quickly found safe passage through the shadows and towards one of the underbelly's many entrances/exits. He kept checking over his shoulder, finding nothing out of the ordinary. That was something, Jude finally said once they began their ascent up the stairs back to the city proper. How did Simon know you were lying? Leland asked. Legacy ability. No, Bohr said. That man is a world-class manipulator. He may not seem like it, but he rose up the ranks of the Smugglers Guild by simply talking, blackmailing, and extortion. He can read anyone he talks to with a high probability of being right. Jude laughed at that. Not that it helped him with his servant though. Maybe you should have let her kill him. Believe me, I wish Simon dead more than anyone. But there are some things you just can't mess with. The people in power during a time of need is one of them. But you are right about him. He's a narcissist and frankly doesn't care about the peons around him. I doubt he gave that woman a second glance. What did he do to become a witch? Leland asked, his voice distant. Besides cold-blooded murder? Bohr asked. Simon is a legacy of alchemy or something close to it. He created an alchemical plague back when he was becoming famous. Holds the threat of using it over everyone to stay in power. Big Boss is the undisputed leader of the guild, but everyone puts up with Simon because they have to. And this plague he created isn't enough of a reason to involve the Inquisitors. Bohr shrugged, pushing open the door to the surface. Not really. Most don't believe he actually ever created it. The threat of it is still there, of course, so no one wants to call him on it. Jude stretched. When do you think they will go through the sewers? As soon as the quest for cultist heads is activated. Those in the streets will be the first to go, then the information about the sewers will come next. I wouldn't doubt that the sewers will be cleared by morning. Then we are staying, Leland said. We have to make sure Glennie isn't killed accidentally. Jude agreed right away, but Bohr took a long hard look at the young mage before him. Fine, he eventually said. It took a few hours, but eventually most of the underbelly's combatants, at least the ones pressed for gold, were in Shoutwell sewers. They used small push carts pulled by stout four-legged beasts to pass through the fog while destroying the sigils. With spears cutting into the sewer walls like oars cutting into a calm lake, the cart rode down the dark passages. At least it did, until cultists started appearing. They didn't last a moment, pouring from a small room and instantly being torn to shreds. Like lambs to a slaughter, they walked directly into a hail of arrows, magical spells, and blades. Not a single one lived, and those who did such killings argued for who dealt the final blow. Money, 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 Leland thought to himself. Always about money. Just do some normal quests. Slay some monsters, gather some herbs. Despite being cultists, he saw the slaughter and grimaced. These people were normal citizens not that long ago. Was it really their fault for succumbing to temptation and promise of power? Leland didn't know, only he didn't like seeing rooms of people killed without a chance of fighting back. His eyes grew cold as each room was emptied out. No Glennie. No woman in white. No sign of anyone other than low-ranking cultists. In the most centralized room of the sewers, something peculiar was found. A device, magical in nature but also oddly mechanical. It spewed fog like a humidifier pumping vapors into the air. Leland and the others didn't get a chance to break it themselves. Big Boss ordered its destruction almost instantly. Soon the fog plaguing Shoutwell would be cleared, but for some reason Leland and Jude felt the city's coverage deepen. They walked slowly with Bohr back to the small village just outside of town, each silently brooding. Look boys, Bohr said, only to be interrupted by Leland. We know, he said. It was unlikely the cultists let him live. We were just trying to remain hopeful. Bohr suddenly felt his spine go still. That's not what I was going to. You were going to say there is still hope, Jude laughed, his voice quivering like the wet shimmer in his eyes. That Glennie is somewhere else, right? That the sewers weren't their main base, and that they took him there instead. Well, yes. Why would they do that? Why would the cultists randomly take a captive? Have they done that with anyone else? Bohr didn't respond. We are young, Leland said. Not dumb. We knew the moment Glennie disappeared. Bohr did have something to say to that. Disappeared, exactly. You two said he was acting strange. That the cultists were whispering in his ear. Maybe they didn't kidnap him but rather he simply wandered off. Yeah, maybe, Leland said reservedly, like he didn't believe his own words. Yeah, maybe, Jude said a moment later, echoing his friend's tone and thought process. Suddenly a screeching noise resonated against the cold wet air. The group quickly spun, finding a red beam blasting out from the slowly defogging city. They watched with horror as the beam slowly faded, redoubling the crazed sound. Chapter 52, Glorious Return. Inquisitor Isabel, otherwise known as the Huntress, watched her young apprentice double over vomiting. The sight, while disgusting, was incredibly informative. The parasitic cloak wrapped around Glenny was quite intriguing. Energy and stamina enhancing artifacts were nothing out of the ordinary when it came to magical items. They all worked relatively the same way and allowed for storage of energy for later use. The cloak, however, was special in the huntress' eyes, and not just because it was a parasitic item. With normal enhancing items, they needed to be refueled by the wearer. Hours upon hours had she refilled her own rings and necklaces over the years, often delegating the responsibilities to whichever lower-ranked inquisitor she was working with at the time. The cloak, however, held no function. It was impossible to manually add energy to the shroud and instead required starlight to refuel. A bizarre advantage but not quite unheard of. Isabel knew of rare items that dealt with the stars, but as far as she knew, none were parasitic in nature. That was why she was pushing Glenny so hard to understand the cloak's, as well as the Sightless King's, power. The two unique powers would work well together, she knew. At least, once the cloak evolved, once it ate enough of Glenny's energy. "Tell me," she said once his lunch stopped pouring from his throat. "What do you know of parasitic items?" "Rare." He spit out a seed or something. "Expensive. Sometimes cursed." Isabel hummed with annoyance. The boy had been getting on her nerves lately, which, while not out of the ordinary, still annoyed her. "Keep going," she eventually said. "They feed on the wearer's life force and / or mana and eventually evolve when given enough." "And these evolutions, what are they like?" Glenny shrugged. "They are usually positive, but sometimes the new effect can be detrimental to style or path." Suddenly a golden bow appeared in the huntress' hand. It glowed slightly, but the high noon sun camouflaged the weapon's true aspect. "Take my bow for example. It is a parasitic weapon. Quite the powerful one, might I add." Carefully, Glenny accepted the bow from his kidnapper. He treated it like a sacred item, like if he broke it, he'd be excommunicated from the country. That was if the huntress didn't kill him out of spite. She laughed at his hesitant inspection. "Would you believe it started out as a spear? Before it evolved, I mean." What? Glenny took a second look at the weapon. "How does that make any sense? I've had it for nearly 50 years at this point. Got it as a kid, you see. My legacy, while not proper, has ways to use melee weapons. After obtaining the spear, I spent the next 10 or so years practicing a new form of combat. But suddenly, it evolved, transforming into the very bow you see now." Glenny eyed the weapon, then its master. "So it's only evolved once?" Isabel shook her head. "Nope. Well, not quite. It evolves with every human I kill, small changes I mean. I named it Stealer's Spear back when it was still a spear. It takes on different elements from the people I kill, an effect that was kept from the initial evolution. So the golden glow. I hunted a band of light magic witches not long ago. The power still hasn't run out." The huntress paused for a long moment. "I wonder what element I would get if I killed you." Seeing through the threat, Glenny snorted and handed back the weapon. "So when the cloak evolves, it could change completely?" Isabel frowned at the reaction. "Yes and no. The cloak's ability will always be similar after evolution. It could change forms, yes, but the additional energy it provides you will most likely stay. It may, however, grow in ability. Once we know the full extent of its power, things will be more clear." Having been nodding along, Glenny suddenly paused at her words. "Full extent?" The huntress smirked. "It's a parasitic item, it will be more useful than an energy battery." Something then caught her eye in the sky. She held her arm out. "We'll figure it out later." Suddenly a great hawk landed on her forearm, the sudden momentum causing her to lurch. It towered over her, easily doubling or tripling her size. Still, she held it on her arm with perfect stability. Isabel quickly pulled and threw a dead rat from her pocket. The hawk gobbled up the treat. Glenny suddenly felt his stomach spin. "You keep dead rats in your pocket, don't you?" she asked, raising her eyebrow. She ignored his poignant look and focused on the bird. Leaning in, she whispered to the oversized animal. It cooed back, quietly chirping while giving Glenny the stink eye. Eventually Isabel leaned back, a frown across her lips. "You're sure?" she asked the animal. The hawk gave a loud call. The huntress then turned to Glenny. "It seems our timetable has accelerated. Leland and Jude found a way to storm the sewers." "That's good, no. They didn't find the heart of the sightless cult." She cursed a few times, kicking at the snow. "Your friends really are dumb, you know that." Glenny sputtered a response. "What? They were supposed to sit back and wait for us to arrive. I'd have dismantled the cult the moment they poked their head out of their holes. But now the Sightless King's vessel is awake. Finding his spine frozen, Glennie muttered what few words he could. That's bad, right? Isabel looked at him while fishing through her pockets. Yes, that is bad. She eventually found a small sapphire orb and tossed it before her. It hovered midair, resonating with the surrounding coldness. Slowly it began to vibrate, eventually forming a shimmering portal beside itself. Time to make our glorious return, Isabel said. Or, at least, your glorious return. They didn't know I was in the city. Glennie didn't hesitate, the thought of seeing his friends propelling him through the portal and back to shout well. The huntress arrived a moment later, bird in hand, and instantly pushed him into the underbrush. Before he could protest, an open hand shushed all conversation. She quickly peered through the leaves and trees and said, "Find them," to the hawk. As the massive bird took to the air, it was then Glennie realized the overcast sky had been dyed red. Sightless King Red. He suppressed a shudder, finally looking at where they had arrived. He estimated a 20-minute jog to the city wall, but for some reason he felt it was impossible. There was a humming, a gentle whisper in his ear in his soul. It vibrated with gnawing reverence, like an addict searching for their poison. He's calling, Glennie heard himself say, not even processing the meaning of his words. The huntress looked at him then back at the city. So it seems. Up for the challenge. Her words were spoken with a smirk, but her tone fell flat. Glennie didn't answer, prompting Isabel to appear before his eyes. He stumbled from the sudden gesture, falling to his butt. I need to know, she said. Are you going to be able to fight? I'm going to need it. Why you going to need my help? Did you think I was training you out of the goodness of my heart? More or less, Glennie muttered. Well, I wasn't. Shoutwell's going to be destroyed and there's only a few around that are able to fight. What about the guard? The guard is the most useless protection organization out there, the huntress scoffed. Do you think they have any idea how to deal with this? She gestured toward the city. Glennie hesitated at the showing. Where are Leland and Jude? She rolled her eyes and looked to the air. Spotting the hawk circling on the other side of the city, the huntress quickly sprinted off, leaving Glennie to follow. It took the better part of 2 hours but the pair eventually reached a small village. They were met with crying. Villagers shed tears while packing their bags and loading their wagons. They moved quickly despite their haunted dispositions, only packing the essentials. The huntress ignored them, and the worried looks she received, and stalked up to the inn where her hawk had landed. With a great toss, she threw a handful of rats up to the large bird before it cooed and took off back to its home. Quickly walking through the inn's silent lobby and up the stairs, the huntress seemingly picked a room at random and knocked. She gave Glennie a quiet look before taking a single step back and pushing him forward. Alkin was the one who answered. We told you we'd be out. His eyes went wide. Glennie. That started a round of commotion and the iconic sound of breaking pottery. Glennie peered around the young noble, finding Leland and Jude sprinting past broken mugs and yeasty ale. Without a word, the trio were wrapped in a group hug, 2 of which slobbered heavy tears. WETH thought you were dead. Jude managed to say. Leland was a bit more reserved in his words, only tightening his arms around his friend. Somehow, despite being trapped by 2 sets of appendages, Glennie was able to glare at the huntress. You didn't tell them you kidnapped me? What the hell? Isabel only shrugged. Jude and Leland went still. They both slowly turned to the older woman taking up the hallway. Then, Glennie heard a muttered whisper and a snap. Chapter 53, Abandoned. Leland snapped his fingers 9 more times before he finally stumbled back, his head spinning. He groaned with horrid nausea, his life force dwindling with threatening speed. Kneel before. His words abruptly ended as a wrinkled manicured hand met his shoulder. Leland quickly spun, finding bore. Shaking his head, the butler leaned in and whispered, We will lose if we fight her. She's stronger than all of us put together. Glaring at the huntress despite the spinning room, Leland found an unafflicted woman. She bore no grimace, no pain, no emotions, really. She simply watched him with a quizzically raised eyebrow, like a mother watching their child do something improper. When she realized Leland wasn't attacking anymore, her gaze suddenly changed into something urging a challenge. She wanted him to continue, to fight her, to throw everything he had and more at her. She'd win and she knew it. Leland saw it in her slight smirk. It wasn't hubris, it wasn't ignorance. Her gaze was absolute, like if there was a battle, she could guarantee herself and only herself to step from the inn's rubble. Still, Leland's heart blazed with anger and self-loathing. Not being powerful enough to kill his friend's kidnapper, even if it was a royal inquisitor? Ridiculous. Shameful. Belittling. The ground beside Leland split open as a soul of the damned sprouted into this dimension. He felt the hand on his shoulder tighten. He wasn't sure if Boar was fearful or trying to warn him, but frankly he didn't care. The room was spinning, and he needed a reprieve. The soul sat on one knee and kept its ghostly head down, offering its arm up to Leland. The young warlock accepted his minion's offering without taking his eyes from the huntress. Green blended through the air as the once alive lost soul merged with his own. Energy quickly invaded his body, ending the wobble in his step and the rotating walls. The soul of the damned didn't instantly fade away. It tilted its head at the huntress, finding her gaze falling upon it. Its ethereal jaw slacked up as 5 other souls made their presence known. They pulled themselves up through the boundary, only revealing their scornful eyes. Each stared at the Royal Inquisitor. Enough. Thank you, but that is enough, Leland commanded, sending his summoned back to their realm but not before catching each of their fiery eyes. Boar's hand eased off his shoulder. You know, the huntress said slowly. Attacking a Royal Inquisitor is grounds for imprisonment. So is kidnapping, Jude snapped. Leland didn't shake his stare. And let's not kid ourselves. My spell didn't break any of your bones. I didn't so much as cause a single crack. The huntress laughed. Honest, at least. I think you get that from your father. Glennie was the one who reacted next. He pushed into the room, dragging Leland and Jude along with him. He then shut the door, leaving the Inquisitor in the hallway. She recoiled at that, honestly stunned. At least, until she broke the door from its hinges. Jude TSKED. Add property damages to the charges against her. The huntress looked to him then to Leland. What happened to you two? Weren't you supposed to be the one to get angry and Leland was supposed to be the calm one? Shrugging, Jude said, I counted to 10, Leels did not. Again, the huntress found herself utterly stunned. By mere children. Lady Onryo, who had been watching the whole scene, asked, Who is this woman? Alkin answered. Mother, I'd like you to meet the Royal Inquisitor known as the Huntress. He then turned to the subject matter. I apologize, I don't think I ever learned your true name. Isabel is fine, she said. And it is nice to finally be with the civilized. Glennie scoffed at that. You kidnapped me, remember? She didn't argue the point. Blinking rapidly and scoffing herself, Lady Onryo calmed herself before saying, Inquisitor Isabel, may I ask what is going on? We were not expecting Inquisitor interference for another week or so. Before she could answer, Glennie cut her off. Oh, she's not the ones you sent for. In fact, the huntress here has been in Shoutwell since we arrived. Meaning, she'd been here since before you sought help. Lady Onryo raised an eyebrow. Has she now? And why, as Shoutwell's only noble house, am I only just now hearing about her presence? Because she would rather. Isabel gave Glennie a look that shut him right up. She sighed, looking back to the lady. I received your plea for help, yes. And I have been helping, just not alerting you. Oh. Lady Onryo said. And what have you been doing? I don't have to explain. Yes, yes you do. If I remember correctly, I am a noble house leader. And house estates have to pay a premium tax for Inquisitor dues. So, I would argue I do have the right to your explanation. Especially after my city has been overrun with cultists and countless murders. The huntress chewed her bottom lip. I have been gathering powerful allies. Lady Onryo scoffed. And who are these allies? Glennie answered that one. That would be me, Leland, and Jude. Amongst others, muttered the Inquisitor. Ah, and Boar, Glennie said with a shrug. He then found a set of eyes glaring at him. Lady Onryo carefully looked between each occupant of the room. Right, she said. So, let me ask you again, Royal Inquisitor, what have you been doing since my plea for help? Isabel hesitated and eventually answered, I have been gathering allies. Yes, these 3 boys and your butler are the only ones I had been able to scout before other events took my attention. But I should also add that I've already located the location of the cult's strong hall. The sewers were empty other than a few dozen low-ranking members, Leland supplied. Recentering herself, Isabel continued. The sewers were not the location of the stronghold. They were, yes, but not once they claimed enough eyes to wake their master. The cult has a history of moving to open flat areas, ones with plenty of clear space. They needed enough space to hold a ritual. So what? The markets? Jude asked. That could have been a location, yes. But I think the city's legislative square would be a better choice. Only a single tree and fountain to remove, not a few dozen wooden booths. Does that information even matter at this point? Lady Onryo asked. As I've been informed, it is likely the Sightless King has been awoken. The Inquisitor nodded. Yes, at least his vessel has been. And what is this vessel? Bor asked. A husk, a fake. Something that can hold his immense power long enough that he can forge his own true body. So we have time. Shaking her head, Isabel said. Not really, no. It will only be a few days before he will be virtually unstoppable. And every passing hour he will get more powerful. So, we need to kill the vessel sooner rather than later. Jude frowned. No Inquisitor backup then. Correct. We simply cannot wait for them. Lady Onryo said, what's the plan then? Simple, the Huntress said. I alone am powerful enough to defeat the vessel in single combat. I just need fighters to keep the other cultists off me, specifically the woman in white robes. The boys shared a careful look. It was then Leland saw the red glimmer in his friend's eyes. Your eyes. I'm fighting, Glennie spoke over. His power no longer restrains me. I adapted to it and can use it. Jude shrugged at the statement. I'm in. Still, Leland was hesitant. They had only just got Glennie back. The false belief that Glennie was dead still weighed on his mind. He had already said they were forsaking Shoutwell the moment Glennie was taken back. But now? Leland conceded to his internal compass and nodded along with Jude. 3 of 4, the Huntress said, turning to Bor. What do you say? Lady Onryo spoke before her butler could. Bor is not participating. He has already done enough. The rest should be handled by a Royal Inquisitor. I urge the boys to heed the call of battle. Leave the war to those being paid to die. Jude didn't count to 10. Wow, you really are a noble. He turned to Alkin. Please do not grow up to be like her. Please. Alkin sputtered, looking between his mom and friend. Watch your tone, child. Bor warned, pointing a finger directly into Jude's chest. Leland stirred at that. Don't make me wither that finger of yours. Again. Bor hesitated at the threat and backed away. Lady Onryo didn't waste any more time and gathered Alkin and the silent Mavi. She strolled out of the room, Bor following a moment later. Before she fully exited, she leaned back through the busted door frame. Good luck, Huntress. Isabel didn't grace her with even a glare. A tense few moments passed before she spoke to the boys. I hate nobles. They agreed with varying levels of enthusiasm. Leland, however, turned to Glennie. What do you mean you adapted to the Sightless King? Glennie's eyes sparked at the question. Well, after I was kidnapped, Isabel explained an aspect of my legacy that I didn't not know about. My mother probably was waiting to tell me after I became a legacy of the chameleon, but you know. Anyway, it turns out I can adapt to certain things. Foreign powers being one of them. And that makes it so you can use said power. More or less. Less for right now. I need to train with it more. An idea came to Jude. Wait. If you can adapt to foreign power, if we find a legacy of the mind, can you adapt to their power and read minds? Glennie hummed at the question and deferred to the Huntress. I will be the one to lock you in prison if you ever try that, she said. Unless you are willing to join the Inquisitors. We'd love to have an atypical mind reader. Glennie ignored the prospect and asked, what are we doing about the sightless cult? Chapter 54, Warcry. Stalking through Shoutwell's defogged streets was something the boys thought they'd never do. Practically the entire time they had been in the city, it had been covered with thick white mist. Seeing to the opposite side of the street added a surrealness to the situation that was simply lacking beforehand. Now, the city actually felt like a city. One that seriously needed protection. Without the fog, the boys also noticed a plethora of curious eyes. They looked out of windows and peeked behind curtains, all wondering if it was safe to leave their homes. The red sky kept them indoors, however. As the group walked, Glennie kept twitching at alleys and narrow streets. He muttered about a buzzing in his ears, but otherwise stated he was fine. It's like we are walking toward a bee nest, he said once they entered the gated walls. Taking his words at face value was difficult for Leland and Jude, yet they somehow found themselves believing Glennie more than the Huntress did. Glennie had shared his story of the mountains, his training, and even how he managed to kill a basilisk. They trusted him, and he trusted them. If Glennie said he could handle a buzzing in his ears, they believed him. The Huntress, however, kept her eye on the young man. Moving toward the legislative district was a short journey but quite painful. Without a plan, the boys haphazardly followed their Royal Inquisitor leader. It'll be fine, she said multiple times, to the point that Leland almost thought she didn't even believe her own words. The Huntress would march to her own death, right? Each of the boys asked themselves independently of the others. Trying to take his mind off things, Leland whispered to Glennie, "How's the cloak working out?" Thankful for a distraction, Glennie answered, "Great. I should have put it on when you two first suggested I take it. The energy reserves alone are a massive boon to my abilities. Not to mention it's pretty cool looking." Leland had to agree with the latter statement. The starry night cloak and Glennie's sparkling red eyes rounded out a certain look. The boys didn't have a name for the look, but there was a certain level of professionalism the right garb gave adventurers. Whether it was intricate wizard robes for mages, battle-laden armor for warriors, or rugged scrappiness for rogues, the cloak paired with the rest of Glennie's attire pushed him one step closer to the boys' collective dream. In a way, Leland guessed that protecting a city from a dire threat also pushed them toward their dream as well. But now that they were actually doing that, it simply felt like just another thing that needed to be done. Being famous adventurers, in this moment, didn't matter to the boys. Gaining personal renown didn't matter. Stories and songs written about their duties didn't matter. When it came down to it, saving lives mattered. Protecting the city mattered. Helping those who needed it most mattered. Not anything else, not anything more. Leland didn't notice, but the tattoo on his hand flapped its wings as he came to the conclusion. A few streets from their target, movement stirred in front and behind the group. From the shadows, rooftops, and slash or behind cover, people stepped out into the streets, stopping the group's movement and entrapping them. They brandished weapons and were unafraid of showing the W mark across their faces. The huntress instantly spit, a deep snarl residing on her stone-cold face. "Any of you 4 cultists?" one of the 7 men asked. Seeing that the Inquisitor wasn't going to answer, Leland said, "No. You guys out looking for more bounties?" The man cocked an eyebrow at the question. We are. I take it you 4 are as well? Don't look like the underground types to me." Leland shrugged. "Not in it for the gold, no. Just to help the city." A short snicker made its rounds through the group of witches. The man spoke up again, "See, we don't like that. Cultist heads are becoming sparser and sparser. You 4 taking the heads from us 7 and not even wanting the gold? Now that's a bit of a problem, don't you think?" The boys looked to the huntress, who was slowly licking the back of her teeth with her jaw slack. She watched the man, her eyes twitching back and forth between the others surrounding them. "Normally," she whispered, "I'd force you 3 to fight them off as training. But we are in a bit of a time crunch, so I must force my hand." She turned to Leland. "Provoke them into attacking." What?" he sputtered. "I'm not allowed to kill witches unless they attack me or someone else first. We don't really have the time for capture. Do I need to spell it out for you more than that?" With a bit of hesitation, Leland looked back to the man. I guess we need to fight this out then." Many sets of eyes bore into Leland, even those of his friends and the Inquisitor standing beside him. "Really? That's the best you could do," she yelled at him. The man looked taken back. "Yeah, I guess we do." Jude stepped forward, drawing his battle axe and pointing it at the man. "I'd like to see you try," he bellowed. "I'll take all of you on. 1 versus 7. Come at me." That got another round of laughs, but it worked well enough. The witches each took a single step forward and postured their weapons threateningly. Before their second step, 7 arrows found the center of their foreheads. Each witch fell over, dead. What? Epic. About right. The huntress ignored the boys' words and stepped past the corpses blocking their path. "Come on," she yelled back. A few minutes later the group was peering around the street corner that led to City Hall. A wide field and concrete pathways crisscrossed around the area, all leading around a flattened fountain and to the buildings that dotted the perimeter. From their vantage point, they could see the outer rings of iron filings, the kind used for ritual circles. In the very center were 2 forms. The first, and most recognizable, was the woman in white. She stood with confidence, her posture alluding to a certain type of smugness. She thought she had won, the being next to her all but confirming that. What the group could only identify as the sightless king crouched beside her. He towered over his kneecaps, hunching over like he was inspecting a pile of ants. Eventually he shifted, revealing a terrible lengthy husk. Eyes littered his disproportionate body, each swirling and looking for hidden threats. Almost on cue, a single eye found the group hiding on the street corner. The huntress cursed, stepping into the open while motioning for the boys to sit still. She took only a single step before a faded red wall appeared before her. She tilted her head, briefly glancing at the boundary and then back to the sightless king. The woman in white was now standing, her eyeless hollow sockets shedding a silent bloody tear. She looked from her king to the usurper and back. She whispered something to the fake lord, receiving a single swillied eye for her piety. The eye blinked, giving the woman enough of an answer. She stepped forward. The huntress spoke, moving her mouth as little as possible, "Wait for my initiation. Throw everything you have into the cultist. End her before she knows what hit." A red circle suddenly bloomed to life below the Royal Inquisitor, as hundreds of sigil glyphs blazed to life. She instantly dove out of the way, summoning her gold-glowing bow and firing a single bolt of pure gold light. The cobblestone sundered from the sudden explosion, breaking apart the sigil. Then 6 more circles lit up. The huntress cursed at the same time Leland did. "Close your eyes," they both shouted at the same time. A deep purple and black grimoire suddenly appeared in Leland's hands, already open to the necessary page. He slammed his palm into the page, enacting a contract with the Lord of the Moonless. Violet wisps of smoke poured from the page, filtering into the air before swirling above Leland's head and solidifying into a halo. He instantly covered his eyes, the bright moonlight from dozens of sigils too shocking. Slowly his eyes adjusted and he began yelling to the huntress. "Sigils! There, and there!" He pointed to each, a gesture the Royal Inquisitor was easily able to follow. 3 more across that wall. 1 plastered against that roof. Suddenly Jude was yelling as well. Both Leland and the huntress looked, finding the woman in white near the red boundary. She took a single step, passing through the wall of resonating power. Leland glanced at Glennie, finding the rogue gone. He cursed to himself, instantly thinking the worse. How could we lose him already? His internal loathing ended abruptly as a red spike of raw power suddenly appeared from beside the woman. Through a gentle, mostly transparent outline, Glennie shoved both hands forward, each thrusting with the stolen power of the sightless king. The woman stumbled back into the red wall, finding it solid. She grimaced as a thin line of blood trickled across her forehead. She chanced a curious glance at the wall, frowning at how it stopped her. Glennie attacked during the opening and was quickly followed by Jude. As more sigils were broken, as Glennie used more of his adapted power, as the woman in white fought back, the sightless king never stopped watching.